Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the 61st Public Square. Yes, 61st, and we're going to end on a high note. I'm Tom Silvestri. I'm the publisher of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and your moderator tonight. And what a day we've had here at the Times-Dispatch. Earlier today, Terry, my mic keeps going in and out. Getting some feedback. Well, I welcome feedback. That's why you're here. What a day at the Times-Dispatch. Earlier we had our artisan who's setting up for the first Friday show, Sam Forrest, polishing some unbelievable pieces of furniture outside. Yes, we've turned into a furniture store here this week. Go back tomorrow night during the reception and meet Sam and find the story about why those beautiful pieces of furniture are in our lobby. Then earlier this morning, we had the Associated Press Capitol Day. I'm sensing I'm getting the independent sign here, so hold on. We had a Capitol Day. Okay. Let's do this over again. Welcome. One's on? This one? Test. Okay. Let me do this. Excuse me while I undress. Okay. You know, I should have started this way. Lord, please make the technology work tonight. I'll be forever grateful. I'll give extra to the Christmas Mother this year. Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 61st Public Square, our initiative in a civic conversation featuring you and a topic of interest to the greater Richmond area. Tonight, a broad topic, a topic that we're going to close the 2015 season with, and that is we're going to end the year looking to and thinking about Richmond's future. For instance, let me just take a demographic test here. How many this is their first public square? Wow. And that might be a good question as to what attracted you here. And if it's Richmond's future, we're glad to have you. So let me just lay out, and first of all, it's a standing room only crowd, so we'll work on the air conditioner in a minute, but we appreciate you being here. And let me just give you the overview about how the night will work. Tonight, we are going to talk about Richmond's future. Basically, what does the region need to consider, to do, to start working on now, so that we're better prepared to capture the possibilities ahead? And how do we not get left behind by other regions that are more collaborative and have their eye on the interest to advance what they're doing in a more dynamic and smart way? Here's the score. Tonight we'll hear the findings of a group called Richmond's Future, which 2011 has been led by Dr. Eugene Trani, who's Virginia Commonwealth University's President Emeritus, in an exploration of Richmond. Let me do this. Let me acknowledge Dr. Trani right off the bat. Thank you for being here tonight. Dr. Trani says there are more seats and one right next to him. The exploration of this group basically zeroed in on Richmond's strengths, our weaknesses, our failures, our accomplishments, our general hopes, and our specific aspirations. Recently, Richmond's First delivered its final report on how the Richmond region compares with similar regions in the United States. It's mindful of the major trends also of what we face in the next 2 decades. But its conclusions are all about predicting the future and proposing how Richmond can plot a course going forward. Tonight, you'll hear them. It's a lot to cover. And that's why we've expanded the public square to 2 hours, starting at 6 o'clock, hopefully ending at 8 o'clock, God help us. So here's how the format will go. In the first hour, we'll lead off with John Martin, whose Southeastern Institute of Research in Richmond has been tracking the 7 huge shifts we face. You know John from his group and his excellent work about the boomers and the millennials. So get ready for your head to explode, not literally. When John tells you what's ahead, before you can understand Richmond's future, you've got to listen to this futurist to help us see what is and what will be. After John gives his presentation, he'll be followed by Dr. Bob Holsworth. You know him from his VCU fame, but he's also Richmond's Futures Director of Research and an outstanding analyst. Bob will deliver 11, Bob is up to about 11 takeaways. You've got any more, Bob? Okay. He's up to about 11 takeaways that encompass the report about Richmond's region. Bob will boil them down into a digestible meal that will have you skipping desserts or reaching for your Tums. But there's 5 years of important work in about 30 minutes. Priceless. After the presentations that basically give you the work of Richmond's future, we'll have a very interesting discussion with 4 analytical, informed Richmonders, moderated by Dr. Gary Rhodes from Reynolds Community College. We'll get their reactions, we'll get their insights, and along the way, I think Gary will help us understand what the next steps might be to Richmond Future's deliverables. And then after that, we'll open it up to your comments and your reactions to the overall program. Everybody got that? If anybody needs water, they're in the back in the blue tubs. Nobody will call you at 8 o'clock tonight and ask you if you have a subscription if you take one. I promise you that. And when we get into the audience part of the show, you can see how many people we have in this audience. And boy, this is one of our biggest crowds. I think you only rival the debate on gun control. Think about that for a minute. But if you keep your comments to 2, 3, or 4 minutes, and when you get a microphone, identify who you are so we can keep you on the record. As always, everything in this building is on the record, and we're being broadcast live on richmond.com tonight. A transcript of it will be available on the website afterwards, and an edited transcript will appear in a future Sunday commentary. So we are ecstatic that the Public Square is the first community forum on Richmond's first report out. And without further ado, on the big shifts that Richmond and others in the country will be facing, let me introduce John Martin from SIR. John?
Do you want to say something? Oh, turn cell phones off. Definitely turn cell phones off, because we're all getting ready to go to the same place. We're going to the future. And I have the honor to kick off tonight. And what I'm going to do is put some context together for you to understand kind of the work of Richmond's future. And looking at the big trends that we all have to acknowledge, every city across the country has to acknowledge, all residents have to think about where are we going and how do we address those trends to our advantage here in RVA. So let's get started. The transcendent trends shaping the future of our region. Well, as a futurist, it's not really hard work. You just connect the dots. You just start to look around and you start to see demographic trends, societal trends, cultural trends. Where are they all heading? And you look at that direction. So what we're trying to find is not a specific point in time, but a general direction. And so you can do that if you just start to husband all of these available resources. And for tonight, I'm going to share with you 7 major shifts. And in the article, you saw a lot of detail on Sunday backing these up. And just refer back to that in the future if you want to get into more in-depth on each one of these. But you can't think about the future without thinking about population growth. And so here in the U.S., we're at 322 million today. Just looked it up to confirm it again this morning. And we're growing to 358 million by 2030. And this is pretty much a fait accompli. And it's a good thing to be growing. It's a lot better to manage growth than manage decline. But when you take it to the Virginia perspective, we're a little over 8 million today, and we're going towards 10 million by 2030. So Virginia's growing in a big way. And where's that growth going to happen? Well, demographers have been talking about the population crescent for some time, the golden crescent running from Baltimore to Washington, Fredericksburg, Richmond, and over to Hampton Roads. That's where 80% of our future population growth is going to be. That's where those 2 million people, 80% of them are going to be in that great crescent. And this has been talked about, and now you see it come true. Just on 95, trying to get off 95 around Fredericksburg, those cars are backed up on 95. It's amazing what's happening. And here we are at the elbow. And so Richmond's growth, we're going to have another 300,000 people. We're around 1.2 million today, our broad MSA, and we're going to go to 1.5 million. So you got to ask yourself about all this. Wow, there's no question our growth is coming. Our growth is certain here for RVA. But the question has to come up is that, well, what's that growth going to look like? Who's coming here? Well, our birth rate is basically flat now. Since the Great Recession, we've turned the corner a little bit. We're at 2.1, but that's the replacement rate. So it's not the natural births and deaths. We're not going to have more births and deaths that's going to grow us exponentially. It's going to be a lot of people coming in from outside. So who are those people going to be? Well, I tell you who we want. Who we want are knowledge workers. And we want knowledge workers because they're the ones that get in the creative class. They generate a lot of the innovations in the economy, and a lot of people benefit in their wake. So thinking about, are we the right attraction? Do we have the right chemistry to attract the knowledge workers in the future? Shift number 2 is urban activity centers. There's a shift towards urban living, and it's been going on for, 100 years. And all over the world, this trend is happening. We're seeing more and more people move to the cities. About half the world lives in cities now, and it's going to go to 80%. And so we're seeing it happen here in Virginia. About 80% of Virginians live in sort of the large MSA areas. And we're seeing more and more movement towards these cities and urban activity areas, in part because of the millennials. The millennials want to be in cities. I'm not saying just downtowns, that's attractive, but activity centers. And look at the projection for the future of Richmond. Here's the city of Richmond. It's turned the corner. Now more people moving back into the city, and we're projecting it right here with the census numbers to go to 250,000. So another 50,000 people come into the city of Richmond proper. Well, it's activity centers you've got to keep in mind. The Planning District Commission here in Richmond has identified 14 activity centers, and they're listed out here. You can think about some of them like Innsbruck or Midlothian, or Rockets Landing is going to be one. All of these are our future edge cities. If you go up and ride around Northern Virginia and you see all these large cities now, they were at one time just activity centers. So that's where we're headed. So when you think about this, you got to say, wow, we're going to definitely see a rise of activity centers, but what does that mean for us? Well, there are a couple of issues to keep in mind. How do we connect these activity centers without becoming so congested? You know, how do we think really smart about transportation? How do we think about moving more people than cars? And I think transit's an answer. So we're going to be looking at GRTC and its evolution in a real positive way to really move us all around. And then secondly, how do we advance our regional priorities if we're going to get greater and greater strength in these activity centers? How do we avoid balkanization? How do we avoid these activity centers becoming their own little kingdoms? We really need to think regionally if we're going to compete against super regions that exist across the country, like North Texas and Route 128 and in Boston and the Research Triangle. We've got to think about a big, powerful region if we're going to compete for economic development prizes in the future. Shift number 3 is diversity. We really are changing the complexion of our population in America, and even right here in RVA. 2030 is the year that the minority is going to become the majority of children. And we're moving this way faster and faster. And here's how you guys can be a demographer. Go visit a local school. Make it an elementary school. At lunchtime, drive by, go real fast, don't go slow, but drive by and look at the playground, and you'll see what the future looks like. It's really quite different than what the past has looked like. We really are becoming a much more diverse society. 2043, the minority is going to become the majority. We're going to really move into sort of a pluralistic society. And it's going to be fascinating. And so all of our organizations and businesses, we're going to have to be thinking this way and making sure we're staffed this way and making sure that we all have the right mindset. And I don't think we do right now. If you look at what is happening with sort of appreciation for minority progress in the U.S., it's trending down among whites and blacks, that we really have to become much more sensitized to this and much more thoughtful about this topic. And I will tell you, in doing research from companies that want to move to locations, understanding diversity and how that locality accepts and thrives in diversity is really a factor. And so some cities are developing reputations for being sort of diversity sensitive. And that's what we have to be here. So in our future, minority is going to become the majority, but how do we leverage diversity to our advantage? How do we make RVA a model inclusive community? So, you know, you don't have to turn on the TV like just about every night now when you see this issue. Well, how do people use us as the example of how to really be the model? That's really what is aspirational. Shift number 4 is the age wave. This is my favorite one, and I'm looking in the room and I see all of us that are happening. To make this, we're all part of this trend, this big shift that's going on. Ever since the dawn of man, there have been more younger people alive than older people. It's always been that way, ever since the dawn of man, except till now. There's a fundamental change that's going on, and it's being brought about by two big factors. We're living a lot longer, thanks to the folks at VCU Health and other academic medical centers. We're living longer, and a lot longer. And then we've got technology problems all the time. Insert smart card. I'm trying. Okay. Then the second shift that's going on is that age shift again. And so look at it over time, when we had that Great Depression, and then after that, we had that huge baby boom, and now we're about at the replacement rate. When you look at that, what's happened now is we've got 5 generations at any one time. So it's shifting the shape of our population pyramid. So it's men on the left and women on the right. Here we are in 1981, and I'm going to flash forward to 2041, and it's a different shape, right? We are shifting from basically a population pyramid to a population rectangle. And that has profound implications on the future for us. You need to start thinking about the population pyramid as sort of the population empire state building. There are going to be just as many people under 18 as over 65. That's the future we're headed for. Another way to think about this, it used to be about 4 people under the age of 18 for every 1 over 65. Hey, Social Security makes sense, right? Now it's about 2 to 1, right? 2 people under the age of 18 for every 1 over 65. In the future, it's 1 to 1, right? We'll probably have a public square on what happened to Social Security when we get here. So just thinking through that, age wave has a huge impact. It really does change everything. There are going to be relatively fewer younger people in our society and relatively more older people. And so let me talk about the older people first. Our population makeup of 65-plus-year-olds is going to go from about 10% to 20%. Now, you might be saying, big deal, John, 20%. Well, what state do we joke about where we sort of warehouse older folks? Florida. And what is Florida today in terms of the population makeup of 65-plus and its overall population? It's about 20%, right? And that's where we're headed as the Richmond region. So Richmond, in the future, by 2040, is going to look like Florida does today. I'm not making this up. We really are going to look that much older. And Florida, parenthetically, is going to go to about 30% senior. So we're going to get a whole lot older in the future. And this is what happens to us. Now, in case you've lost Barbie, here she is again. You've got a couple of challenges because you can't shake off some of the things that come with aging. You don't see as well, hear as well. Stoplights get a little more confusing. And it's just the natural course. And chronic diseases are also a natural course. And once you get one, the second one happens quicker, and the third one really comes, comorbidity. So we're going to see a dramatic increase in all of these chronic diseases. And so we're going to have to manage that. And we're going to have healthcare becoming at the center of everything. I mean, there are going to be all kinds of sensors. You're seeing people wear these bands now to mark how much they walk during the day. There are going to be sensors in our clothing, in our car seats, in our carpets, trying to help us stay healthy and give us warnings on when we need to go to the doctor. So in the future, healthcare has become the new community anchor. It used to be build a golf course, then the community gets built around it. Now it's build a shopping mall like Short Pump, and the community fills in. In the future, it's build a hospital, medical healthcare campus, and the community comes in. So the folks at Bon Secours and St. Francis, brilliant. And that's leading the way of what we're seeing happen across the country. So how do we use healthcare to our advantage? We have 3 health systems here, VCU Health, Bon Secours, and HCA. How do we really leverage that expertise and all of those assets to really make Richmond a model healthy community? And even tap into sports backers and all the things they're doing in their quest to make us the healthiest community in America. This is going to become a huge, huge trend, and it's driven by a lot of us in this room. Shift number 5, income poverty. And I have to mention this. This is a sad one, but it's reality, and we don't see it improving. When you look out, you can say, oh gosh, well, we have this flat sort of poverty rate. It's 12 to 15%. But that's not the real story. The real story is, look how many millions of more people are in poverty. Right? We're now at 46 million people out of the 322 million. And if you start to overlay on top of this, okay, let's go to 150% of the poverty line, which is not that high in terms of income, and you start adding another 40 million people to this, and then you start adding in people to get a check from the government, no, not a tax refund, but some sort of benefit, some sort of, helpful check, you start getting up to half of America. And the trend is not our friend in this case. 1 in 4 live in poverty in the city of Richmond today. If you just go right outside to the contiguous counties, 1 in 10 in Henrico County live in poverty, and it's about the same number for Chesterfield. So it's there, it's a reality. And now I think more and more of us are seeing it. We just finished a study for GRTC, and we asked, on all these different community needs, which ones are the most important? And we asked this to people in Richmond and Henrico and Chesterfield, and look at the reduction in poverty. It's the number 3 issue in terms of we've got to do something about this, because people see it now everywhere. And we never saw it on these sort of questions and charts 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So I think more and more of us are seeing it, and more of us are saying we've got to do something about it. Another way to look at this is the wealth gap. You hear Obama talking about this and Janet Yellen. The older folks, 62 plus, always had in the history more assets than the younger people, 40 and under. And it's historically about 7.5 times a difference, because you get to save a lot more the older you get, right? Well, now, today, that same dynamic is twice that. The wealth gap is now 14 times. So we've had this lost generation, the millennials, getting out of college with a lot of debt, $29,000 in debt, and having not to get the perfect job that they studied for. And so it goes on. And part of the problem is not only the income, but just how expensive it is to live. And this is a great study done by the Center for Housing Policy. And it breaks down different income levels. I'm going to focus on the moderate income households and look at the 2 biggest expenses in the household. Housing costs and transportation make up 60% of the paycheck. 60% already gone. And so I don't see us getting out of this anytime soon unless everybody gets into figuring out this solution. So poverty is going to be here, and we've all got to work on figuring it out and how to get us out of it, because it affects everybody. It affects the health of our community. Shift number 5, work-related shifts. Work-related shifts. If you look at the statistics in Richmond, the entire MSA, the whole region, there are 38,000 unemployed people. And if you look at how many jobs are posted, 52,000 jobs. And you're saying, what's up with this math? What's going on? Well, there's a mismatch of job skills. We don't have the folks trained for the jobs that are available. And it's a very serious problem, and we don't own this in Richmond. This is a national problem. The demand for middle-skilled workers is going to continue to grow. When I say middle-skilled workers, I'm talking about people that have the skills that are a little bit higher than you get from high school, but less than a 4-year college. Middle skill skills. That's the definition of it, right in between those 2 educational levels. And what we see in the future is this is going to grow and grow and grow. The middle skill jobs account for 49% of our labor force today, but we only have 40% of our workers with those skills. So we have that gap in demand and supply. And when we look at it in the future, between 2010 and 2020, 46% of the openings are going to be middle skill, the big red part of that circle. And so that's where we have to be focused. Those are the jobs of the future we have to fill. Luckily, there's some real winning models out there that we see in other communities, and we visited them actually as Richmond through the Chamber. The Nashville Academies, the Ford Foundation, and something called P-Tech schools. There are going to be about 100 of those by the end of 2016. And when you look at these models, the common denominator is business. Business has actually stepped in and helped with the curriculum and helped to link education with work. And this is happening more and more, so we don't have to make it up. What we have to do is get organized and tap into it. So meaningful employer partnerships is the whole key with this particular trend. And we're going to see this growing and growing importance of really pre-K, but K through 12 and workforce training. We're going to go back to the basics more and more, and to be successful, business is going to have to be there at the table. So how do we engage more players is going to be a big question for us as we move forward in RBA. The last shift is the rise of the millennials. I'm looking around the room. I don't think many of them got this message tonight, and I think we need to get more of them here. But they are starting to be everywhere, and they're an important force for us. Remember, we're going to have relatively fewer younger people in the future in our society, back to that big shift I was talking about, going from a population pyramid into a population rectangle. So fewer younger people. So what does that mean? When you think about, wow, we need these young people for our creative energy. We need these people for our workforce. We need to have them here in RVA. RVA needs to win here because there's a coming worker shortage in the future. And I want to take you to some statistics we got from the Bureau of Labor thinking about our pipeline of workers. In the future, going out to 2022, you can see we're going to go from 154 million workers to 163 million. That sweet spot of the 25 to 54-year-old age group, that's going to increase, but just by about 2%, right? Where are a lot of the workers going to come from? Well, it's really going to be the older workforce, the 55 plus. That segment's going to grow by 28%. But look here at the youngest segment, an actual decrease in workers in that young segment. And we're seeing some communities actually projected to have fewer young people in their society. And so what we believe, and we're already seeing it with some cities that understand this sort of calculus, they're going, oh my gosh, we got to become a hot spot for young people now. We got to be a cool place that young people want to go to because there's going to be an emerging battle for them, an economic development battle. And so cities are preparing for this future right now, and we already see in our research some sort of early leaders getting ahead and getting a reputation for being a hot spot for young people. It's called placemaking. Placemaking to try to attract these young people is the new science of economic development. And there are a lot of studies that are out there, and the economic development industry is starting to talk about this more and more, understanding that workforce is such a key to the future for any city. Portland has definitely got an early leader advantage. Denver is a really hot place for young people. Just ask your friends where their daughters or sons are thinking about moving to. Denver is usually on the list. Austin is another hot place. In Nashville, in fact, the young people in Nashville are so excited about their city, they talk about their city more than the next closest city, Austin. In a net promoter score, these guys are twice as excited than the people in Austin. And the people in Austin are twice as excited about their city compared to most other cities, right? So we've got to have apostles and make people really excited about where we're headed and what we're doing, and particularly millennials. Because it's changing the economic development model. The old model was you just go after big companies, you try to win some of those Fortune 500s, then people are going to follow and your community grows. Now the new model, and I should say the evolving model, the shifting model, you still have to go after companies. You still have to have an economic development outreach and try to get those companies to come here like we did with Stone. But you spend a great deal of time building a sense of place and community, building your culture, making your place cool and hip. And then people will come because they want to live there. And then with the labor force in place, companies come. And I think Stone was a great example. And so that's what we have to be thinking about. It's not stop going after companies, but add to it, you've got to accelerate your culture. You've got to make sure your locality becomes a hot spot, in particular for young people, especially as we move forward. So what do millennials want in a place? What are they looking for? Well, we do a lot of research in this area, and we've identified all of these attributes that they're looking for through qualitative focus groups. And what we've done is put together a survey instrument and gone into a lot of different cities and asked those millennials what they think about their own city. How do they rate their own city? And so they fall across, here in this case we show you Raleigh, Washington, Charlotte, Austin, Atlanta. The attributes and ranking fall across basic attributes. You've got to be safe. You've got to have a variety of employment options, and you've got to have quality and affordable housing options. But then from there, it falls into a second category that we call place-making attributes. And this is that culture that I'm talking about. How do you accelerate that and put your best foot forward to say, we have a great community here? So I'll tick off some of these, and just think about RVA as I mentioned some of these attributes, and in terms of their importance, I'll start at the top here, but offering outdoor recreation options, having a great food scene. Man, we have that. Embraces creativity, embraces innovation, is near the mountains, pretty close, has access to water, is bikeable, walkable, easy public transportation, embraces business startups. So the quick answer is we're doing a lot of things right, and in fact, RVA is one of the hot spots in the country among millennials. So we too have a little early advantage. but we can't dare give this up. We got to keep driving it. And in a few minutes, we'll probably hear more about what we're doing in that area. So becoming more intentional about our millennial workforce is going to be important today and extremely important for us to remain viable for the next century. So where are we with millennials? Well, today it's 29% of the workforce, and real shortly, in 2025, it's going to be 40% of the workforce. So we've got our job cut out for us. We've got to make sure we get the right millennials here, that we keep our brand moving forward, and that their brand's real. It really is supported by a wonderful, wonderful community. So those are the 7 trends. And those trends have helped inspire and guide some of the work of Richmond's Future to say, gosh, we got to understand where we're headed as a country and where we're headed as cities, and understand what's that context for us to make sure RVA really leverages these trends to our advantage, so we can be the most desirable place to live, work, and play for decades to come. So a lot of the studies that you're going to hear about referenced in these topics are all on Richmond's Future's website, and I encourage you to go look at that because we go into such detail, but just about every study matches up to one of those trends. We tried to be consistent and to make sure that we really were thinking about the right topics to keep Richmond in the leadership position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Part 2, are you sure you still want to go after a futurist, Dr. Bob? Bob Holdsworth on the Richmond Future's takeaways in the digestible meal. Bob?
Great. Okay, before I get to that, what I'd like to do, can I first, have you heard the back well? Great. How about now? That working better? Great. Okay. What I'd like to do is first just try to give you a little capsule of what we tried to do over 4 or 5 years, and then try to take away some of our 11 big findings over time. What we did first, as John said, we just tried to compare the RVA region to other similar places around the country. And we started off by looking at the region, not just the city, not just the city and the 3 larger surrounding counties, but the entire region. And this took us all the way down to Petersburg, and we spent a lot of time talking about all the things that are happening down in Hopewell and Petersburg and the like. And then what we tried to do was to compare our region to the 9 other regions in the country of similar size, so that we'd start actually with apples to apples. Because a lot of times when we do comparisons, we sometimes just compare us to, the place that we want to compare on a particular item. They do this better or they do that better. But let's really take a look at how do we compare, by and large, to the other places of similar size. They tend to be places like Raleigh, Cary, Jacksonville, Hartford, Louisville, Memphis. But we took 9 other places that the census says, here's where the region compares. How do we compare? Then secondly, after we did those comparisons and looked at the trends that John just mentioned, we said, how do we move forward? And what we did there is that we looked at 4 different approaches in some fashion to moving the region forward economically, for the most part, and to try to become a more prosperous place. The first approach is a very traditional approach. We looked at what industries do we have, or might we begin to have make more prominent in this region than we did before. It's kind of called a cluster approach. How do you develop industry clusters that people can get jobs and people can prosper with? Secondly, most economists will tell you that at the end of the day, the biggest investment anybody can make to promote economic progress is in education. What do you need to do in this region in terms of education? Thirdly, we looked at a lot of the things that John just described. How do we make this an interesting, cool place, an attractive place that people want to come to? What's the placemaking for it? And fourth, we looked at what we might call interregional and interorganizational strategies. How might we relate to other regions around the state, and how might we relate to the state government? So we looked at that as well, and that's what we're going to try to describe to you right now very quickly, our 11 key takeaways. The first was, compared to the 9 other regions in the U.S. of similar size, Richmond metropolitan area is actually a relatively strong performer. In terms of overall personal income, we do well. In terms of total employment, we do well. In terms of people's employment in jobs that are going to be good for the future, IT, biosciences, again, we do relatively well. What's the caveat? Caveat is that growth on a number of these key measures from 2000 to 2010 has been relatively tepid. So there's no reason to be complacent, because what's happening is that overall we're in a relatively strong position, but at the same time, overall, we're not growing, and in particular, we're not growing like Raleigh-Cary, our competitor down south. That has grown far, far, far faster, far quicker, and is outpacing us in some fashion. Takeaway 2, and this goes to what John had mentioned. However, for residents at the low end of the economic scale, conditions have worsened over the past 10 or 20 years. Not just a Richmond phenomena, but one that we have to address. Overall poverty rates have ticked upward. Percentage of children in poverty increased by 15% between 2000 and 2010. Housing's become less affordable for renters. And as John also mentioned, the distribution of poverty is changing. The highest growth, in some ways, Henrico County. It went from 6% poverty rate to 9% poverty rate in 2010. That's a 50% increase in 10 years. Very significant there. Takeaway 3, how do we do in terms of education? RVA ranks 3rd out of the 10 peer regions in college degree attainment. In terms of the number of people in this region who have college degrees, relatively strong. What we saw, however, that was a little bit troubling and that we didn't even know when we started is that we ranked 8th in the percentage of adults who have a high school degree. So once again, when you take sort of the low end of the educational scale, we have some real challenges in the Richmond region. Part of that was related to low completion rates in cities like Richmond and Petersburg and the smaller rural jurisdictions as well. Takeaway 4, when we began to look at where do we have some opportunities, we first identified, we said this whole region, particularly if you go down to Petersburg and Hopewell, has a real opportunity to take advantage of our location to become a logistics capital. We looked at transforming the Port of Richmond, that you could have a major inland port here related to the Virginia Port Authority, around which you could have distribution facilities. You could be creating all kinds of jobs for people with all kinds of skill levels in this area. At Fort Lee, they have the Army Logistics University. It is the center for logistics training for the U.S. Army. Over 30% of the people in the U.S. Army will come through Fort Lee at one time or another. Many of them will also opt out of Fort Lee eventually, and they can be part of the workforce if they're used capably. And they also have what's called the Commonwealth Center for Advanced Logistics Systems, which all of us allows us to strengthen our relationship with Hampton Roads, connecting the Port of Virginia to the Port of Richmond. Takeaway 5. Let's talk about education. As John said, we need to focus on improving underperforming school systems to ensure that all students can acquire the skills necessary in the 21st century. This is just absolutely crucial. I think if you take a look at a lot of the work that's being done in the nonprofit community now, there's an emphasis on this, particularly on the middle schools. What we've seen is that we've done a pretty good job enhancing performance in elementary school, and then we kind of move back. And so a lot of these issues, to have a middle school renaissance in Richmond that is in this region, is absolutely crucial. Secondly, again, to talk about one of the issues John mentioned, the region needs to focus on reinventing career and technical education to enable students and parents to understand their career options and the pathway to achieving these choices. The situation here is this, as John mentioned. Many of the jobs that are needed today, the skills that are needed, may not require a 4-year degree, but they require something beyond high school. They require some kind of certification that might be given through the community colleges. They require some kind of advanced training. And we need to find a way to ensure that the students in this region have the capacity to know those jobs, identify them, and get them. And some of them are very high-paying jobs. And what we find is that there's that mismatch that John mentioned between the skills that folks have and the jobs that are available. And part of it has to do, and we think, with perhaps a stigma that somehow has been attached to career and technical education. I was with somebody the other day. They said, we need a huge campaign directed simply at the moms there in order to find some way of ensuring that we can do a better job in meeting this skills gap. But that's a critical issue for the region. Takeaway 6, to go to the placemaking issue, we believe that we could be a leader in the competition among mid-sized regions to attract talented young professionals. That certainly when you take a look at what young professionals like, the Richmond region has a lot of it. We have an arts community that is absolutely second to none among cities and regions our size. When you take a look at the combination of the state museums, the local efforts, the incredible School of the Arts at VCU, all of the things that are now happening distributed throughout the region, whether it be in Henrico, Chesterfield's building an arts center, the theater that's gone up in Hopewell, all of this is remarkable there. We have what's called a thriving food scene. Our restaurants and our chefs are now national news. Though, as one person says, that we also, unfortunately, are in the top 10 list of food deserts for access to food for poor people in the community. We have tremendous outdoor recreation opportunities, so we can really be a magnet for young people. But the study that SIR did also said that while people who live here and people who are outside of Richmond see this as a sort of a great place to be, they don't identify it as a great place to actually live, work. They don't see the employment opportunities here as being fabulous. And what we're thinking of is think of the students that are at William and Mary or at Norfolk State or at UVA. Are these students being attracted to come back to the RVA area? And we're not sure they are. And so what we recommended there was we think the business community needs to sponsor a coordinated outreach and internship program to colleges across Virginia and to students from RVA who might be attending other places that showcase our employment options and our quality of life to convince graduates to start their career here. We have to do a much better job of taking this remarkable education corridor we have that extends from Charlottesville through Hampton Roads and use Richmond as a magnet for these students to come and live. Finally, on this issue, we also felt that our troubled history with respect to race can impact this issue as well as the region's overall political climate. We saw in the studies that young professionals did not put diversity as sort of a high mark in terms of the Richmond region, that we don't have the reputation that Charlotte and Atlanta have as a region that's made substantial progress in bridging racial divisions. And the other fact is that we're only beginning, as we're seeing over the last year or two, or last 3 or 4 years, to come to terms with our own history in an inclusive manner in a way that can be sort of acknowledged and recognized. That this is going to be important, as John mentioned, particularly because of the diversity that we now see. Because what we see is that this is an issue, diversity, that at one time we always spoke about the city of Richmond. Now it's an issue in every major locality that we have here. I was just looking at some census data the other day, and it noted that Henrico County in 2020, according to the Virginia Employment Commission, in absolute numbers will have more African Americans than the city of Richmond. That's how diverse our entire region is quickly becoming. In terms of interregional strategies, we think that focusing on Hampton Roads and logistics makes real sense in the short term. We also, as I mentioned, think we need to capitalize on this educational corridor that exists between Charlottesville and Hampton Roads. If you think about that, There's over half the public university students in Virginia are there. Almost all the medical education is there. We have 3 of the 4 largest private institutions are in that region. Liberty happens to be the largest university in Virginia right now because it has 75,000 online students outside of the region. And we have most of the major Virginia-based HBCUs in this region as well. We need to do a better job of that. And then finally, we need to think about how we relate to the state and use incentive programs such as one that's now emerging called Go Virginia that's going to support private sector job creation for regional collaborations. And we need to think about to do a better job of accessing the state incentives that do exist and the dollars that can exist from the state to help us out. Takeaway 10, and this is the big, sort of always the elephant in the room, that when we speak with people, they actually have a palpable lack of confidence that the jurisdictions and institutions in the region can work together to execute the kind of action that will enable us to meet the potential. That is a big issue that everybody faces. And a lot of folks have said, you know, how do we get around this? How do we do this? You know, but people, they point to things like the stadium, the lack of ability to cooperate there, transit system. They point to the children's hospital not being able to reach an agreement on that. And everyone says that here it is, that, you know, we just don't know how to execute, and there is that lack of confidence there. Our own sense is that in the near future, there's not one answer to this. There's not a legal, structural, or political answer that's just going to be this, you know, sort of magically going to solve this problem for the region. We're not going to become Indianapolis. We're not going to have a unified government. That we just do not see that politically. But what we felt is that the region can learn, however, from a lot of the cooperative efforts that have worked. You know, if you take a look at it over 20 years, there have been a lot of things that work. We helped to expand the airport. We had the convention center downtown at a time when nobody thought that anything could be built downtown. We've had the sports backers doing all the great things to have outdoor recreation. We've had everybody gathered together and help support the VCU School of Engineering and the Biotech Park. And I think what we need to do is find a way to develop the collaborative sense again in this region by looking back and seeing some of the lessons that we can see out of the successes that we've had in cooperation. I might also add another area that still exists today that does very well is some of the public safety communication efforts that go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So at the end of the day, what we felt is that Richmond region really has done some, you know, looks relatively strong in some ways. Ann Macheris, who is here from the Federal Reserve, did a lot of that work for us and was really very helpful. But at the same time, we have these significant challenges, but they're not ones that we can't move forward if we can address some of those key issues, and that's what we had hoped to do and set that agenda out for everybody as we think about where we go in the next 10 or 15 years. And that's our takeaways.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bob. So we've got 7 shifts and 11 takeaways, and you're saying, what do I do with it? Well, first of all, let's all just stand up for a minute. You've been sitting for an hour. Just kind of stretch a little bit, because we're going to tee up a panel conversation moderated without a table, moderated by Dr. Gary Rhodes from Reynolds Community College. Well, they will take the first shot at the reaction to 7 shifts and 11 takeaways. Yeah, it's all right. You can move around. Okay. All right. And there's 3 seats up here for anybody who's sitting in the back. All right. Let's sit down again. Gary?
I don't know if I'm on yet. Am I on?
Yeah, you're on.
Am I live?
Gary, they've gotten up. They've gotten their second win. And now it's your time to help some subject matter experts, some informed people, figure it all out. I'll hold the mics for when they get a chance to talk, so go ahead and tee it up, sir.
Thank you, Thomas. We do have a seat up here. Somebody like to sit down? Is that one taken there? Right up here in front. Someone can have this seat right here. So we have a panel of 4 of us, and I'm going to introduce us in a second. One there, and then there's another seat over here. One more seat, front right here.
Here
Come
it
on.
comes.
2 seats. One more. We've got one more seat up in front. Who would like to have it? Michelle, where are you? Come on up.
Gary, it's okay if not everybody's sitting down before you begin. It's just, I feel like I'm at church here.
There's no basket, Thomas.
Okay.
So let me suggest this. We're going to take a few minutes, those of us who are on the panel, and just share some thoughts with you, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. And I would ask that when we get to the audience part that you stand, and we'll have a microphone that will run to you so that everyone can hear very clearly. But on the panel with me tonight, we have Rachel Burgess. Stand up, Rachel, who is with Southeastern Institute of Research, the same organization you heard John Martin earlier that John is CEO of. And, you know, Rachel's a millennial. Did you notice that? So she has some expertise in many areas, especially working with a firm like SIR. So she's going to be part of our panel. We have Ted Chandler. Stand up, Ted. Ted is one of the senior partners in New Richmond Ventures, which is a venture capitalist and economic development entity with us here in the region. We have Ken Johnson, who is CEO of Johnson Marketing and has been in our community for about 25 years. And so we've all been part of this partnership with Richmond's Future, and so that's been very exciting, and we thank you, Dr. Trani, for making that happen. So I'd like to start with Ted with the first question. Ted, if you could stand up. I want to ask you about, there was a comment in the Sunday paper. It said that Richmond's Futures was to strive to combine organizational independence with practical relevance. So organizational independence with practical relevance. So put for us in context, what do you think this whole exercise is about, and how important is it really?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think that this work product is deserving of our attention. And I would say that for multiple reasons. One, I think that Dr. Trani, when he created this group, he did some things at the front end of this that assured us that the work product that came out would have the kind of independent and unbiased reporting that is what we need as a region. So I think it starts from the fact that he set up a 501c3. He brought together community leaders to fund it that included the Community Foundation, and the only bias anywhere was everybody that participated wanted Richmond's future to be even better than its current. The second thing that makes this worthy is this was professional research. This is the way Dr. Holsworth and John's group organized this. They went in and used techniques to try to glean exactly what is going on. The third thing is, I love the fact that they started with us. They didn't start with what is our aspirational future, and so let's do these things so we can be better. It was the benchmarking of us against our peers. You know, so often when you look at initiatives like this, they never start on a solid foundation. They say, we should do this, without actually paying attention to our current state, our present state. So when you take those 3 factors, independence, professional, scholarly work, based on a current, sober view of present, and you overlay John's work of these immutable demographic trends, then whatever work product comes out has got to be stuff that we should pay attention to.
Thank you, Ted. Well, I'd like to direct my next question to Rachel. If you could stand, and we'll give you a microphone here. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about what should corporations and nonprofits do, because our future is tied a lot to the millennials and attracting them and the ones who graduate from VCU and U of R and VSU and Virginia Union and so on, even J. Sargent Reynolds, I suppose. How do we keep them here? So what do corporations and nonprofits have to do to make this the most attractive place in the world for millennials? Tell us.
Well, there are definitely several different things that corporations and nonprofits can do. You know, one of them is we need to realize that Richmond does have a lot going for the city. We have a lot of the things that millennials want, and we need to be talking about that. And we actually conducted some focus groups among HR leaders when we first started the YRVA study, which was one of the studies of Richmond's future. And in these focus groups, we were asking HR leaders about their perception of Richmond and what they think that millennials think of Richmond. And I was moderating these groups, and I had to keep a very straight, non-reactive face as one of the participants said, "There's nothing to do in Richmond after 5." I about jumped out of my chair. And this is someone who is recruiting millennials to our city. She was an HR leader for a large corporation, and there were probably half of the leaders in the focus groups had no idea what there was to do in Richmond. They thought Richmond was unsafe, that people were leaving on the weekends because there was nothing to do. And the reality is there is so much to do. There's an amazing food scene. We have incredible outdoor recreation. So we need to find ways that we can educate our HR leaders. And in addition, as people are moving to Richmond, where's a place that all of these people can go to learn about what's happening in Richmond? One thing that we've talked about with organizations like HYPE is having a central database of a calendar of everything that's happening. Where are the cool places to live? Some people that come to work for Capital One might end up out in the suburbs in Short Pump and think that there's no one around their age, when in reality they're all living in the city. So how do we help millennials when they come to Richmond get plugged in with what the city has to offer? And HR leaders are a great stepping stone in that education process. Another thing is, we learned, and Dr. Holsworth touched on this, is that a lot of college students in Richmond don't think that there are jobs in Richmond for them. And so we need to do a better job of connecting the businesses in Richmond with the universities. And same with those universities outside of Richmond. There were we did a study among students at UVA and William & Mary and a lot of the universities outside of Richmond, but within Virginia. And their knowledge of Richmond and what Richmond has to offer was next to nothing. They thought, it was dangerous, there was a lack of diversity, and that there were no employment opportunities. So we need to do a better job of getting the businesses connected with the universities. Now, one thing we do know about millennials is that they want jobs that are innovative, that are creative, and that allow them to have increased opportunities in those categories. So a lot of that means that the companies they're going to be interested are more startups, they're more entrepreneurial, they're smaller businesses, and a lot of these businesses don't have the time to go to a career fair or are not able to afford interns. So we need to think about ways that we can showcase these companies to college students, whether that's having open house tours where they can just stop by these different companies. Again, I'm not really sure what the answer is there, but that's something that needs to happen. And one last thing is that we also need to rethink how we are discussing and talking about the jobs that are available. Again, millennials want jobs that are creative, that again allow them opportunities to grow and to be challenged. And so when they're looking at a job description, whether it's for a bank or some other large corporation, and they just see analyst, and they're thinking that they're going to be sitting at a computer all day entering numbers. And while that may be true, we need to think about ways to highlight opportunities for collaboration, for creativity. That creativity isn't just art; it's problem solving, it's thinking strategically, and highlighting those opportunities as we talk about the different jobs that are available.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to take this over to Ken. Ken, would you please stand? I have a question for you. You've been with our Richmond region now for 2.5 decades. You've been involved on a dozen-plus committees. We've shared time together. If of these 11 findings or recommendations and the 7 trends, is there anything at all like low-hanging fruit, and where do we start with all this? Any thoughts about that?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I feel like I'm on Jeopardy. We all have an opinion about the way the region should move forward, and I sort of chuckled at myself when we looked at the audience tonight and we said the millennials aren't here. I don't know if we texted millennials to let them know what was going on, or if we put it on Facebook, to get them here. A couple of things that jump out at me right away, though. One, I think as a community, we need to be transformational. We need to be innovative, as Rachel mentioned earlier, and transformational. When you look at what John mentioned earlier in his presentation, he talked about Denver, he talked about Austin, Nashville, and a few other cities. Each one of those cities were very deliberate in changing how they look and how they feel. Denver wanted to be an international city, so they expanded the airport. Austin wanted to embrace their quirkiness and their awkwardness as a community, so they embraced the entertainment industry. in a big way, and they also embraced the technology industry. Huge, huge, huge advancement for them, as well as Denver. Nashville saw that they were a country music town. They changed it to a music town. Then they saw that they had many hospitals there. They had a huge healthcare industry in Nashville. So then what they decided to do was embrace the healthcare industry, but not in the traditional sense of embracing healthcare. They embraced it in a way that we want to be the thought leaders in healthcare. We want to come up with the new gowns, the new shoes. We want to come up with the new medicine. We have all that here in this community right now. I think it's about changing our mindset towards getting there. For example, recreational. We have some of the greatest parks in the country right here in Richmond. We should be making the canoes here in Richmond. We should be doing the oars right here in Richmond. We have some of the best highways. Our location is phenomenal at the intersection of 64 and 95. We're using the port right now, but we also need to understand how the port, education, and all ties in with our destination and location. Our school systems, we cannot continue to do the same things and expect the same results. We've got to embrace innovative schools. We have to look at alternative learning methods. All of us have not learned the same way and will not learn the same way. I am a standing testament to that because I was not the smartest kid. So I told Dr. Rose earlier, I don't want to go to my soapbox up here, but there's so many things that we can do to be transformative and change in our city. And we just have to embrace those things, from transportation and education, as well as housing. We look at the poor. There's a big gap right now in our community between the middle class and the poor, huge gap. And someone made a joke earlier about food deserts. That's a serious issue in our community, and it's a sad issue. But how do you begin to embrace that gap between the poor? One is you look at the housing, and you do what D.C. has done. They've made it a mandate on all new housing. 10% has to be infused with low income. No matter whether it's private developed or public, they make sure that it's infused. Those are ways in which we can cause change.
Thank you, Ken. All right, Ted, I'm going to pick on you. You have a microphone here. Hold on. I'd like, the city just approved a 40-year lease with the port, right? And we know that logistics, Fort Lee has this huge logistics opportunity down there. In fact, it's the logistics university for the Army. Virginia State has a logistics program. So connect the dots for us a little bit between logistics as a potential area for us to really be great at and known at and benefit from, and the port and other pieces that you might think of.
Great, thank you. I think that it was really eye-opening for the business community when this group came up with this concept of clusters and tried to identify where we had some unique strengths and determined that, wow, we are really a great logistics center. Some of that are the reasons that Ken just said. We happen to be on Interstate 95, the main north-south interstate corridor for most of the population of the United States. We're right at Interstate 64. We've got that east-west corridor going. We've also got the fact that we happen to have this port that is the Virginia port, which is going to become more and more and more important in the future with the work that's been done there. And the fact that we have a Richmond port that has languished a bit until really this report came out, pointed out how the James River, which is, of course, the most historical river in the United States, was also essentially an interstate from Hampton Roads to Richmond for goods, right alongside Interstate 64, with a whole bunch of undeveloped land around it in Richmond that could be benefit from this. So I love the fact that the report said logistics. It's actually, why was Amazon moving here? They figured out we were a logistics center before we figured out we were a logistics center. But once this study connected those dots, pointed out the number of businesses that we have that are actually logistics businesses. I mean, what do you think Universal Corporation actually does? What does Owens & Minor actually do? One by one, you look at these companies. So it's that kind of identification that then gives us confidence that, wow, we have a unique advantage over other cities. All we have to do is recognize it, do some barrier removal, and then enjoy the benefits.
Thank you, Ted. Well, let me shift back to the millennials for a second. And one of the comments that was made earlier that was RVA, Greater Richmond, is not great. It's not a great place for jobs, especially for millennials to find work. They just don't think of this as a place to go and find a job. Yet we graduate a lot of number of students and so on. So stand up, Rachel. I just want you to, if you would mind, you know, the typical workplace that most of us in this room, I can tell because we're the same, you know, generation, the boomers, most of us grew up in a work environment that is pretty structured, and even though in my grandfather's generation they kept a job for life, we didn't always do that, but it's pretty traditional. So what's the ideal workplace like for someone who's a millennial? Because we're going to have to help shape those workplaces down the road too.
Yeah. I think if it was boiled down to one word, that word would be collaborative. Millennials, we've grown up in school doing a lot of group projects, you know, both in high school and in college. So we're used to solving problems as a group. We're used to thinking about different topics and challenges in a group environment and running ideas off of each other. And so having a work environment that really allows that will be helpful. I think another way that we can see that is having really open work environments that really, I guess, expands the opportunities for collaboration. And you see that more and more, whereas the traditional office used to be, you know, a long hallway with offices off of it. Now it's just a big open room with a lot of tables and computers. And I think that that really is something that is appealing. Millennials love community. They thrive off of community. And so it helps create a stronger community where you get to know your coworkers. I think millennials also really want to have their voice be heard. And maybe sometimes they want that before they have earned it, which is probably valid. But you know, I think that there's a balance there. I think that there is opportunity to bring millennials to the table for them to learn and to grow. We know that boomers are thinking about their legacy and that they want to, they're really open to mentorship opportunities. So there's a really symbiotic relationship that can happen there, whereas boomers can mentor millennials, and millennials will think then that they have a seat at the table. And so really trying to keep that relationship going will be really attractive to millennials as well.
Thank you. I hired a millennial a couple years ago who's great, and one of the things millennials like to do is they like to balance the professional and personal time, and I told Joe about tonight, and he said he already had something planned, and I thought, well, I can't ask you to come then, change your plans. But Ken, you mentioned schools before. So what's the formula, if there is one? What do we need to do as a group of community-interested people, passionate about quality of life here? And what's the magic fix for taking our school with the challenges it has and having people want to move to the city because the school system is so great, recognizing it's going to take time for that to happen? But any thoughts about that?
Sure. Again, I think we need to be more deliberate in our actions with education. I think with secondary schools, John mentioned earlier about P-Tech schools. New York City alone has 125 P-Tech schools that focus on Apple Computer, Microsoft. You can be a Microsoft engineer in high school and graduate and go to work for Microsoft. We need to be embracing that type of atmosphere.
Well, they don't know what a P-Tech school is, so talk about that.
Well, it's primarily a technical school where John spoke to it earlier, yep, in which you can focus in critical key areas. If you want to fix Apple computers or if you want to fix Boeing jets, you can go to school just to work on Boeing jet engines.
Specific job skills.
Specific job skills. And we need to look at that. That's a huge opportunity here. For some, four-year colleges is not an option. Secondly, I mentioned earlier the alternative learning methods. You know, some of us, years ago, an outlier was homeschooling. We all, oh my God, homeschooling, they must be crazy people. You know, that's not necessarily a bad thing these days. Charter schools. In the black community, oh heck no, we don't want charter schools. For years that was the case. We pay our taxes, we need great schools, and we're 100% right, we do need great schools. But again, we need to look at charter schools beyond the fact that they are different types of schools, but they're different learning schools. And charter schools can be a great enhancement to our educational environment, a great enhancement. What was the second part of the question? I'm all off.
Well, I was talking about where we would go, what we need to do to get this moving a little more quickly to improve our schools.
So a lot of what we need to do, whether it's school, transportation, all, it's going to be political will. And that's one of the things that I think that our community lacks in a tremendous way. It's having the political will sometimes to make that unpopular decision and to move us forward and not necessarily represent just your particular area, but represent the entire region. Because we have great schools in this region. Let's be clear about it. Chesterfield, Henrico, and Richmond Public Schools all have great schools within them. But I think that we have a population there that are not getting the best educations. and that's some of the poor kids in our community. And we have to address them because they're all of our kids.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So with 11 recommendations and 7 questions, there were a lot of areas we could talk about. So I'm going to do one more quick round of questions with the panel, and then I'm going to see if anyone from the audience has to comment. And I'll start with, well, actually, I'll ask the question first, and then I'll see which panelist wants to volunteer first. The question is this. Knowing that we were going to do this tonight, and knowing that we didn't rehearse and practice, and I didn't assign or ask questions.
That's fairly obvious.
Yes. So, if you thought you could be asked something tonight about this work that you haven't been asked but you want to speak to, ask the question and answer it. What would that be? Ted, you want to go first? Stand up.
Sure. Well, you know, we ended with the elephant in the room, which is that we do have separate municipalities by our Virginia Constitution here. We're a Commonwealth, not a state. And so the real question is, can we actually come together, public and private sector and social sector, and take on these big challenges? And so my question would be, can we? And my answer would be yes, and here's why. I think you start with the fact that when you have listened to this report, and you particularly listened to the work that was done by the Southeastern Institute here, no municipality anymore can say, oh, that's someone else's problem. Concentrated poverty, oh, that's a problem over in Richmond, but we're over here in this county that doesn't have that problem. In fact, I think increasingly you can see from this body of scholarly work, we're actually all in this together. I'm a representative of the business community. We only look at it as a region. We don't really change our point of view when we drive across a county line. So I think we're at a point where the answer is, if you will look at this, you will get collaboration. You know, collaboration is one of the higher level C's. You start with communication, and that's actually being done pretty well among the communities that are in the Richmond Region Planning District. Communication. You then get to cooperation, which basically means that you don't block stuff that other people want to do. But what we aspire to is that higher level of collaboration, and you collaborate where it's in your self-interest to do so, and where there's confidence that what we're doing is actually the right thing. So I actually think that the 5-year body of work from this group in its entirety, it feels to me like it is the blueprint for Richmond's future, and all we have to do is recognize that and act confidently on the recommendations that are in it.
Thank you, Ted. So what pertinent question were you hoping, either of you, that would be asked tonight and wasn't? So ask your question and then respond to it. Answer the question, please.
Well, Bob mentioned earlier about cultural differences, race relations, if you will. And I think the question would be, Ken, what are your thoughts on race relations in Richmond? And I think we're at an all-time low. And I think our community refuses to have the real dialogue about it. I think that we have great history in this community, great history. From years ago, Civil War, you name it, it's here. But it's only 2 sides. There's a 3rd side missing. And that permeates itself through economics, that permeates itself through education. Everything that we're doing today, it still lives on. And we have to find a way to have that real conversation, and not just in our homes, but in church on Sunday, in our offices on a weekly basis. That's where we're lacking as it relates to race relations.
Thank you, Ken. Rachel.
All right, I think the question that hasn't been asked that I might ask is, we keep talking about how do we better attract millennials to Richmond, and that we need to become a hot spot. But what does it mean for the millennials that are already in Richmond? And what can they do to help move the city forward as well? And I think that, you know, one of the things is that we just need to be our own champions. And I think that there's a big groundswell moving in Richmond. I think we're very optimistic, and you know, I have the privilege of sitting at the table at a lot of the conversations that have been happening about talking about the region and the different challenges, and there are very few millennials that are a part of that conversation. But I see a lot of the energy that's happening, and that I'm feeling it's from the younger cohort in our city, and we're optimistic. We love to work together and again collaborate, and I think that gives me a lot of hope for the future of Richmond, that we can come and work together better across region, across race, across age, and I think that we as a community of young people need to step up. You know, I would love if this room had a lot more millennials in it, and how do we encourage each other to get engaged, to demand to be at the table more, because we have great ideas, but to also learn from those who have gone before us and understand maybe why Richmond is the way that it is. Why is it broken in the ways that it is, and what can we do to move the city forward together?
And many of us have been thinking about how do we prepare the next generation of leaders that we have, the thought leaders. And one of the challenges that you might imagine, which is real, is that many of the millennials now are not at a high enough level within, especially if it's a larger organization, that they get to go on the Chamber's inner-city visit trip and they get to do this and that. So when Ted Chandler chaired the Chamber Board, I think it was about the time when he was chair, we created the Helping Young Professionals Engage the HYPE program, which pulls literally millennials. You have to be under 40, so we couldn't go, but we supported it. But it was a way to start that conversation and position the millennials for the future roles that we have. In fact, there's even a scholarship now within that inner-city visit trip to take a handful of millennials to experience another city. So with that, let me suggest that we're resources, and we also have our two presenters here as resources. And let me open this up now to the guests who've come. First one, raise your hand. All right, please.
So we'll have two mics. I'll have one, and Editor Paige Mudd will have one.
One right here. Okay. All right. Stand up. Tell us your name and.
My name's Debbie Rep, and I recently had the very incredible real-world experience of running for the Senate of Virginia in Western Henrico. And aside from all the political issues about campaigns, what I found was all the people, I mean all the people I met with, thought the poverty level was about $38,000 a year. They are so misinformed or not informed at all about the kind of facts that you've put together here about our region. And the people in Western Henrico basically said, we don't want to have anything to do with the city of Richmond. We don't trust the government there. And we like things the way they are. Thank you very much. And by the way, keep all immigrants, migrants, refugees out of our community. Amen. So I think it's wonderful what you're doing, but there is, the great percentage of the population is not even on this plane with you in terms of the issues you're talking about that are very, very real and that we have got to be able to deal with if we're going to prosper in the future. And how do you address that?
Either of you have a reaction to that?
Yeah,
Stand up, John.
Okay. Well, I applaud your insight on this, and I think it's up to all of us. I mean, it's a communication issue, and it's understanding reality. We shared with you the trends that are going to happen. They are happening. So it's a fait accompli on these 7, and it's our responsibility as folks from RVA, no matter what part we're in, we are the tip of the spear. We're the folks that get it, and we've got to go out and tirelessly tell everybody and keep spreading this message. That's what it's going to take, because we've got to get everybody behind this.
I would just say that if I look at Henrico, I see a rapidly changing community and a rapidly changing county that is really grappling with a lot of the issues that we have raised. I'm not sure that you saw it in your election, but my sense is that if I look at Henrico and I look at the Board of Supervisors elections in Henrico and I look at the demographic changes, my sense is that Henrico is beginning to at least grapple with these issues, and inexorably it will have to grapple with them more given the political and demographic dynamic that is occurring in Henrico, and as John said, that we certainly see in the school systems there. So.
And I can add that I'm in conversations with Henrico leadership now about things we can do, especially on the east end, to help be in front of as much of the change as we can that needs extra support. So, other hand.
Gary, right here. I got
over here.
Gary.
Okay.
Yeah, Leonard Edlow.
Leonard.
We talked a lot about poverty, but in my 42 years in healthcare, I noticed something else developing here, a permanent underclass, where when I came here, most of the uneducated, unable to read or write were older, and they became younger. And now I see where a grandmother hadn't finished high school, and that's why we finished 8th, and then the child, and then a grandchild. So how do we deal with that? And it goes further, you know, as a pastor there in the Northern Necks, and having preached in the local jails here, those same people who weren't finishing high school, I was preaching to them on Sunday evening in the jail. And then Ken talked about the economic thing. When it comes to, I'm not going to call it minority business, I'm going to call it what it is, black businesses. They have gotten lower and lower and lower. And what is the majority community going to do to encourage this, not only with economic partnerships, but with just the tax money from government spending? In 42 years, other than Medicaid and Medicare, I never got a local or state contract to do anything, and probably one of the most recognized pharmacists in the United States. It makes no sense.
Thank you.
Any reaction from the panel? And I got the next question over here.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, sir. Speak directly to the mic.
Yeah, I'm Charles Robideau. I'm not a millennial. I'm not even a boomer. So why am I here? Why did I read everything that was in the Times-Dispatch about this event and all of the studies and everything? I was hoping to see something tangible that could be done about public transportation, not just in the city of Richmond, but in the area. I live in Chesterfield. I'm one of almost 400,000 citizens of Chesterfield. We have no public transportation there. We're the same as Henrico. Now, I heard here that the counties want it that way. Well, there are some in my county that want it that way. I asked one of the supervisors recently at a meeting, when are we going to get transit here? He said, well, we don't have any riders. I said, well, how are you going to get riders if you don't give them something to ride on? This is so elementary. Now, as I read and hear all of the comments, things about transportation in the materials about this event, the only reference to public transportation has been to say, well, gee, it's kind of embarrassing that we don't have it. There's nothing in here at all. It's a huge gap. Nothing at all about what to be done, how to go ahead and get it done. Okay.
All right. I hope you all signed your disclaimer about possibly being called on. So, Ken, I'll call on you first, and then David Green from GRTCs. Think about how you might respond to that, David. Ken?
So, again, he needs a mic, Paige. Wait for the mic, Ken.
Wait.
I can't hear you back here. Thank you.
That goes to one of the earlier statements I made about being innovative and transformational. We've got to address the transportation issue here in this region. It's horrible, but it boils down to one thing, and that's the political will. You know, oftentimes the people are ahead of the politicians, and we have to make our voices heard in that regard. When we talk about Denver, we talked about Austin, we talked about Raleigh, all those places now have what? Strong public transportation systems. And that's the thing that we're missing. They have strong infrastructure, broadband. We have areas in Goochland right now that cannot get broadband. I mean, it's 2016 now, in 30 days. And we have areas in our community that cannot get broadband in Goochland. Really? And you have urban areas that cannot get broadband. So we have serious infrastructure issues that we really need to address in our community.
Thank you, Ken.
Got a question in the back here?
Well, David Green he's our CEO from the GRTC, and so I thought he might want to respond to the transportation question.
Yeah,
you did sign a disclaimer, didn't you, when you walked in?
I did.
Okay,
yeah.
thank
Good
you.
evening. David Green with GRTC. I appreciate Mr. Robideau's comments about public transportation. You know, it's such an obvious weakness here in Richmond, but for some reason it seems to continuously be left out of the conversation. But his comments and some of the comments that John Martin mentioned in his presentation are identical to comments that I'm hearing from colleagues of mine throughout the country, that people's attitudes towards transit are changing, meaning they want more of it. And the communities that don't keep pace with it are going to get left behind. The Brookings Institute survey that gets referenced a lot throughout our community that mentions that Richmond is a top 50 city in terms of population, but ranks 92nd in terms of access to jobs, that identifies the need here. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people in our community, friends, neighbors, coworkers, family, that have no other way to get to work than on public transportation. But the new research that's coming out, and some of the research that SIR helped GRTC determine, is that the want is now being identified. There are people with cars that want to ride public transportation. They want to have that option. So the issue of transit boils basically down to three questions. The first one being, should we improve it at all? And I think the answer to that clearly is yes. So then the questions become, what do we do? And then how do we pay for it? What to do is already being addressed. There's an initiative called the Richmond Regional Transit Vision Plan that's already underway. It's being overseen by the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation and the Richmond Regional Transportation Planning Organization that basically is going to look at how to improve transit for the next 25 years. It's a plan that's going to be set in place to identify transit needs out to 2040. And I encourage everybody to participate as much as possible in their public meetings. How to pay for additional transit then becomes the next question. And that's an issue that's already been answered by other jurisdictions throughout the country in that they have what's called dedicated transit funding. We currently lack that here, and it is an issue. Transit in our region is funded by the local governments through what's called their general funds. It's the same pot of money that they use to pay for other important initiatives such as schools and public safety. Excuse me. Public transportation is not an inexpensive endeavor. It's very expensive. But without dedicated funding, then we'll not be able to only significantly expand transit. It's going to be difficult just to maintain the existing level of service because the cost of putting the service that we provide for the community just continues to increase year after year. So the beauty of improving transit basically is that the result is a positive impact on other issues like poverty, things that we heard about in John's presentation, economic development, education, workforce development, health care, affordable housing. As you improve public transportation, the result is a positive impact on all those other areas. So I appreciate Mr. Robideau's comments again, and I would like to have the conversation continue throughout the public.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Thomas, who was next?
Yeah, got a question back here, man.
Okay. Hi, my name is Carter Bailey. I'm actually a VCU student, and what I've learned is to ask how. Like, you say we need to do this, how to do this and everything, but the exact way. I know that there are some organizations in Richmond actually putting things into motion now. And I was just wondering, how would you exactly reach out to millennials? And how, like, would you exactly do things to try and get them? You can say we need to do this and how we need to do this, but the exact steps you could take to put this into action.
When you say to put this into action, you're talking about to reach out to attract more millennials?
Yes.
Is that the question?
Basically,
okay.
like, how would you reach out to attract us? I mean, I know a lot more of us have actually become more environmentally conscious, and basically why a lot of us are here in the back row. But, yeah, what can you do?
Sure.
The audience. Sorry, it's popping up. So I'm Caitlin Kilcoyne. I work at the Greater Richmond Chamber of Commerce. For the past couple years, I've managed our leadership programs, and our leadership programs have really 100% focused on attracting and retaining talent to Richmond. How do we do this? We develop events and programs that showcase the Richmond region area. We have a Why Richmond program that attracts interns, so companies have numerous amounts of interns in during the summer. Lots of companies participate in them. It's pretty much showcasing the RVA lifestyle to them. So it's 8 weeks, 25 events, crash course. So they're not leaving their internship being like, well, there was nothing to do after 5 o'clock in Richmond. Like, they were ziplining across the Belle Isle Rock Quarry. They were meeting with President Lacker at the Federal Reserve. So they're getting a taste of Richmond there. The next step is HYPE, helping young professionals engage. And I will say tonight that these surveys that come out in these public squares, it's not when you walk out of here like, well, that's a survey that we're going to put, and file away. The YRVA survey served as a huge resource for the HYPE program. We rebranded, we shaped our mission and vision around that, and we put on events and programming from the takeaways that the YRVA study published. We embraced the food scene, we talked to HR professionals, we highlighted the neighborhoods, and Rachel served on the board of HYPE, and she helped me immensely. It helped me actually do my job. It made me look good. So thank you guys for putting that survey out. And so with these conversations, the Chamber is really focused on the millennial side of things, the regional collaboration. We just don't stop at HYPE. We have the leadership programs that go on. And I think one of the important ones that we're really trying to build is governing 804, because we realize that there's a lot of distrust not only within the millennials, but also the community as a whole with our elected officials. And we believe that you can't, work well together if you don't understand who you are as a leader, what your vision is, what your mission and value is, and how do you align with the city's mission and value, and align with that. Because if your values don't align with the city, it's just not going to work out well. So Governing 804, a lot of corporations and nonprofits have been supporting it, and we do an open call for applications coming up this fall, or next spring actually. So we look forward to having folks enrolled in that, and not just young professionals looking to run for office, but anybody in general looking to run who could use a little self-reflection on what it is to be a better leader. So I hope that answered your question.
So Caitlin, thank you. Caitlin was not a plant. Well, let me finish what I was saying. I was saying she was not a plant. She does great work here trying to help the millennials. Now, yes, sir, you.
My name is Roy Bryan. I came through here today and looked around this room here. I was passing by, and I said, I got a problem. I got a housing problem where some ladies are getting ready to be put out during Christmas. And they're all black. They live in the public housing. And the man told me, you need to go in there because a lot of Christians are up in there. And if you talk to those Christians, they will be able to get to the people over there and tell them, you better not put them people out during the holidays until we can get in there and see what's going on. So I'm just asking all you Christians to just call over there, because some of this problem that Mr. Johnson talked about, this is an alligator and a hippopotamus, and we got to get that. Now, they had millennials. I was sitting on a thing with the BRT, Dr. Green back there that just finished talking, he knows me, and we were talking about the BRT, and it came up with choice riders. And I told him, I said, well, can you describe a choice rider to me? So the young man that was giving the demonstration, he couldn't describe it. So I want to know, if I'm getting on the bus, I want to know who I'm getting on the bus with. So the thing is, now it's millennials.
Yeah, it's millennials.
I'm going to say to you, please put somebody of color up there with the others so that we can know what millennials you're talking about. Do not leave us out, because we have been left out in a whole lot of things. I came down here because I know you were at the newspaper. I didn't get my newspaper the other day.
It's like the screen in the window in the door.
I wanted you to know I called him 3 times. I can keep it. But look, it's very important. We have housing problems. We have transportation problems. And all we want to do is get on at the bottom of the rocket landing to get on the bus. If Rosa Parks was living on the other side of Williamsburg Road, do you know she would not have been able to get on the bus, and we would be the whole, years back from everything. They're doing a good job of isolating us. They done circulate us all around the city, and you know what we look like now in this city? A Hostess cupcake. And I'm telling you, this is not going to work. Now, you look at the room, and I thank you Christians, And if y'all can call housing. No, no, I don't want them to talk to me. I want them to talk to the people down there that operate the housing. Huh? Yeah, Richmond Redeveloping Housing. Please talk to them. And when you go back to the churches, you're going to feel a whole lot better that you have kept some black people from being put out on the street. And I'm going to give this mic back to you. What you going to do about my paper? Okay.
Mike back, and let me go back to a question that was asked earlier by Dr. Edlow, and Dr. Trani would like to respond to Dr. Edlow's question about the black small businesses. Dr. Trani? Yeah, I think that's let's get a mic for you here. Hold on.
It's a very significant issue that Dr. Edlow, who served with distinction on the board of the VCU health system for 6 years, raised. We need the institutions, both private and public institutions, in our metropolitan area to make a concerted commitment to employ minority contractors. I had the good fortune to go through the $200 million building that is being built next to City Hall, and I asked the question, what is the minority participation? And the minority participation on that building is 25.2%. That did not happen by accident. That's something VCU has been doing for years, and what VCU has done in that area needs to be replicated not just by private businesses, but by the government localities. You cannot set quotas, but you can sure set guidelines, and that is something that Dr. Edlow raised, and it's a very, very important issue.
Thank you, Dr. Trani. Yes.
My name is Tyrone Green, and I'm a native of Richmond, but I also live in Henrico County right now. I heard you all talk about what I would consider the jewels that we have in our area. But what we need to start thinking about doing is opening those jewels up so we can appreciate them, we can see them. You know, you talk about the port. I would ask how many people have really been to the port to appreciate it, to see what's down there out of all of this. How many people have really been on a campus of a Virginia Union, a Virginia State, a VCU, not at the basketball game, and just really walked? and just really walked and appreciated what's there. I remember I took a tour of some individuals, Caucasians, to all of the HBCUs. And one thing they said when they got off the bus, oh, this is so nice. And I'm like, well, what did you expect at the HBCU? So that was a subtle message that they sent to me that we weren't expecting what we saw. And so I really questioned, stop taking trips to Nashville and Denver. Look, stay here. Open the doors here so we can see. I've never been to the Richmond Port. Don't know how to get in. So I can't appreciate you talking about it. And I doubt if some of you have ever been to Virginia State, Virginia Union, Norfolk State, J. Sergeant Reynolds, John Tyler, Richard Bland. Open all those up, because the minute folks recognize that you're going to come, they're going to put on a display. CCAM, the Rolls-Royce plant. How many folks have ever really seen that and can appreciate it? So let's stop spending thousands of dollars to go to some other place to see what we could see here and appreciate what we have. It's like your family. If you don't appreciate what you have, you're going to lose it, because somebody else will come and take what you have.
Thank you, Tyrone. Brian?
Thank you. Brian Glass. We've all heard the term Rome wasn't built in a day. Something in regional cooperation that affects all of us that is in the process of taking place right now, and every one of us requires it. It's called water. 30 years ago, Henrico County realized that there was going to be a water shortage, and they started to plan on how to deal with it for the next 50 years. And right now, under construction in Cumberland County is a reservoir that in 3 or 4 years is going to supply Goochland, Powhatan, Henrico, the city of Richmond, and it's going to take into consideration the need for this region for the next 50 years. It's going to cost a fortune. It's been planned. The county owns the reservoir. All the land around it is owned by Cumberland County, and it's going to be pumped into the James River at high when the water's running. When the water's running heavy in the spring, it's going to be pumped out of the river into the reservoir, and then back in when it's July, August, and September, and we have a drought. This is regional cooperation that's worked. Everyone hasn't gotten up on a soapbox and talked about it, but it's real, and it can work with transportation, but it's going to take time.
Thank you, Brian. Doug Pick, Feedmore.
Hi, privileged to be here and privileged to be CEO of Feedmore. So consultants love folks who want to change, and they love two groups. They love the top 10% because they'll do anything to stay ahead. They love the bottom 30% because they'll do anything to survive. We are blessed to be in the middle 60%, and we're cursed to be in the middle 60%. That's what makes it so tough for this area to go, how do we move forward? Because there's risk in that. And I don't know how you do this beyond these wonderful concepts and data without courageous leadership. I do have a curious question. How many elected officials besides Ms. Mosby are in the room tonight? Elected officials, please.
Count former elected officials.
Or former. So it takes leadership. Now, and by the way, it takes us to drive them to have that courage. It takes a citizenry to say, we've got to do this together. And I've seen corporate folks do it, like Ted and Jim Ucrop, and you name all the folks that are in here. I've seen nonprofits do it, like Feedmore. And we'll continue to do that. We've got to get these governments. It's up to us to give them the incentive. I'll vote for you if you cooperate. I'll vote for you if you collaborate. It's up to us. From a nonprofit point of view, Feedmore serves these food deserts. It is an intense issue. But we can't solve things with just food. So next year, stay tuned. We're going to have collective impact efforts. We're going to combine with food as a magnet to get jobs people, housing people, and health folks to come together in a very complex problem, which will take years, but we will do it. We'll put data to it, and we'll hold ourselves accountable. And nonprofits can lead as well as corporations. There's three legs of this stool, my friends from the elected official side.
Thank you,
Dr. Trani might want to say what's next in March, given the elected officials.
Yes, we are very fortunate that the Times-Dispatch will publish in pamphlet form as an insert, presumably, the full final report of Richmond's future, all 60 pages. And then in March, we are inviting all the elected officials from the 13 counties and 4 cities that make up our statistical metropolitan area, plus business leaders and nonprofit leaders, to a gathering that Gary Rhodes has agreed to host at J. Sargent Reynolds. So the elected officials are going to have an opportunity to hear these recommendations, to hear the trends that John is predicting, and the takeaways that Bob Holsworth has presented to you tonight.
Panelists, and then we'll come right over.
Just to show you all two pieces of living legacy here. Well, actually 3, now I'm looking around the room. You have Henry Marsh here in the room. Henry, stand up. One of the great civil rights leaders in our community. Secondly, a man that has made his mission to give back to our community, all classes, and that's Jim Ucrop. Jim, stand up. Jim has helped more small businesses and more people in this community than anybody you can ever imagine. And lastly, if you want to see transformation, things take place, and see a vision come to reality, we talked the other day and we realized Gene Trani has been here 25 years. Look at downtown Richmond and look at what you've seen in the last 25 years. Thank you, Gene.
Oliver, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Oliver Hedgepeth, university professor from Alaska. I moved down here a few years ago.
From Alaska?
Yeah, it's a little.
Oh, you definitely have the longest way to the public square.
Well, do I get a new free newspaper for that too?
Come on, man. Come on.
I try.
Okay, Oliver.
I came here for one reason, and that was just to look at this quote and read it. It says RVA should focus on reinventing career and technical education, your takeaway 5. And I do believe it's very important. And as a professor of logistics, by the way, for 30 years, I've seen a big gap from the college students I graduate with master's degrees and MBAs who've been waiting tables for 10 years now with those degrees. And here in Chesterfield, I live across the river there in Chesterfield now, and I recently ran into the Career and Technical Center up on Hull Street, and they have a logistics program for high school students, you know, to take a college course at John Tyler and get a job the Reynolds plant. I heard about that. So my question, and by the way, it's just a wow moment for education, and that's my focus here is education. Rachel's brought up some points about where do we place these students from high school or Reynolds or wherever, and historically we've been placing them in Walmart, Target, FedEx, UPS, a lot of these large places. But I was going to ask you, how do we coordinate all of these different schools, these career and technical centers together with Reynolds and the other schools? That's one question. But then an answer was popping up with Rachel. I've been placing students with Target and Walmart all my life, 30 years. Maybe I need to focus on black-owned businesses, maybe small startup companies. Our company's got 5 people in it, and they want to be innovative because I've seen some of these millennials, and they're eager to take my job. You know, they want my salary right now, you know, and they can't get it. And I try to tell them they get a job at Home Depot. You know, they're going to put together bicycles and, you know, picnic tables and things like that the first year. So how can we collaborate better in the career and technical centers with Reynolds and others? I'll ask you that question.
So before I respond to that, I think I also heard that they have Target and Walmart in Alaska. Is that true?
We do have
Yeah.
those up there. They recently came.
Yeah. So here's what how I would respond to that. First of all, the facts today verify that it's numbers 1, 2, and 7. So for every advanced degree, could be medical, engineering, you need 2 people with a bachelor's degree to support that one advanced degree. And you need 7 people, which could be a certificate, it could be 2-year associate degree, but you need 7 people here to support those 2 bachelor degrees to support the 1 advanced degree. So we are focused now in a big way on trying to increase the training that we do for the 7. That's where more of the jobs are in our region. It's actually more of it's a national trend as well. So there is a lot of partnering that goes on. We're the biggest feeder to VCU, for example, and we partner a lot in their programs. Students can come to us. They can take certain courses. You can't take welding and expect it to transfer to VCU or William & Mary. It's not going to happen. But you take the right classes, get a certain GPA, you have guaranteed transfer to the 4-year universities here in Virginia. We also partner a lot with the K-12 schools. So we started a program within RICO called Advanced College Academy. It was 4 years ago now because the first class graduated. So these were freshmen in high school, kind of like a governor's school where they came from all over the region, but they ended up meeting at J.R. Tucker High School. That's what governor's schools do. They come from all over. And they stayed together as 2 cohort classes for 4 years. So their freshman and sophomore years, they were taking high school classes. Their junior and senior years, they were taking Reynolds College classes at the high school. Our first group just graduated this last May with 42 students who graduated with a 2-year associate degree and a 4-year high school diploma. Now, technically, they graduated with their 2-year associate degree first because we graduate in May and the high schools graduate in June. So Henrico now has a second group down in Highland Springs, so on the east side of the county. Powhatan has started a group. Goochland has started a group. Next year, Hanover starts 2 classes, and the city will be starting a little bit of a hybrid version of the same thing. So we are partnering from the K-12 level all the way up now with the 4 years. And it's a little bit of a moving target. You know, the jobs are cyclical. I'll give you an example that when the economy is great, the community college enrollments dip a little bit because people are at work. When the economy gets bad, 2009 mortgage crisis hit, we went over 20,000 students. Our typical numbers around 18,500, close to 19,000. So let me close my comment with 2 figures that if I, as college president of Reynolds, I would say if there were 2 things you remember tonight. One is 1 out of every 4 workers in the greater Richmond region has attended Reynolds Community College, 1 out of every 3 healthcare workers. So we're aware of that. We're working on it. We recognize that we want people with advanced degrees. That's important. That's going to be needed in the future. We're also focusing on that 7, 2, and 1. So, next question. Yes, over here. Yes, sir. Bill.
Hi. Bill Godfrey from the Anne Veronica Foundation International. And I'm going to read. I can speak, but I'm going to read to keep this short and pointed. Okay. First of all, I'd like to compliment all for the work on this. This is really good stuff. Another thing is I think there's another trend. And I think that trend is climate change. What's happening, 97% of the climate scientists say that it's happening, it's real, it's getting worse, and we don't have good things to look forward to if we don't start to take some action. So it could be done here. The local effects will include temperature rise, increased number of days over 95, resulting in decreased crop yield, decreased labor productivity, increased electrical demand, increased respiratory disease, and increased heat-related mortality. This is coming from a report done by 3 former U.S. Treasury secretaries. And they're talking about Virginia. So my question is, have the future effects of climate change in the region been considered in your report and recommendations? And if not, I'd like to give you an analogy.
Hasn't been one of the key focus areas for us.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I'll give you an analogy. If you were General Robert E. Lee tasked to defend Richmond, and you sent out 100 scouts to gather intelligence about whether the Union assault on Richmond was coming, and 97 out of 100 said yes, would you plan a response?
That's an SAT question. You take it, Gary. We actually go over there and then we go over here.
My name is Rufus Atkins. I want to know why the union was omitted in this study. You talk about the port authorities, but a lot of people don't understand that the union control that port down there. They tell you what ship they're going to unload and when it can come in. They can go into Norfolk, but if it's not assigned to Richmond, it'll sit in that port out there in Norfolk.
Oh, that union. I thought, I think, but you factored in the labor issues too over there. But that's a good point about the full picture there. Okay, over here. Welcome.
Thank you, Bruce Tyler. All right, thank you. I'm not used to these mics. I'm glad Ken Johnson said a few words about the 3 people in the room, because without them, we wouldn't be here today. The report clearly is a very positive report in that sense, where we stand in comparison. Innovative solutions is the key to this conversation. And, you know, I know every day that Dr. Troney went to work trying to figure out a way to make VCU better. We have to make Richmond better. And it's through innovative solutions, and there's no doubt about it. When it comes to the schools, in Richmond Public Schools, we need to start looking at alternatives. The middle school is the issue. We have great Richmond Public Schools. I've seen it firsthand. I was in a school this morning and saw it firsthand. The reality is, it's when we get into the middle school. We need to look at a K through 8 model. That would be an innovative solution for public schools. Transportation. We keep talking about transportation. We all agree we need to have transportation in this community, but we keep going back to old models and not new models. We need to be looking for on-demand transit throughout the region that won't cost the citizens money, but in fact make it work. We had an opportunity to do that and we lost it. Maybe we can get it back again. Economic development, we talked about the poverty cycle. I will tell you that the Richmond Health Department has done a great job of helping reduce teen pregnancy. Teen pregnancy is one of the biggest reasons we have such a high poverty rate in this area. We need to continue to reduce teen pregnancy to change the economic balance in our community. The port, I'm just really glad people talked about the port, because 4 years ago I led a charge to get Richmond Port tied in with the Virginia Port Authority because of one reason. When the new canal is opened down in Panama, we know that it's going to be a monsoon of ships and containers coming in, and our port can make a difference and we can provide economic development. Regional cooperation, that is critical to where we're going. And I will give you a solution to that where we could start to solve some of our major problems. Several years ago, the RMA became a hot topic. At that time, we had many people come to us and say, we can actually get about $250 to $300 million that we can use for a regional project, such as a diamond, such as a Coliseum. And I hope we'll go back and look at that again, because those are the kind of things that we need to think outside the box to make this a better place. Again, we're standing on 3 giants in this room, efforts, and the next generation has to step up. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Bruce.
Okay, over there. Yep, ma'am.
I'm Ann Maliff, and as we've been talking about what the blueprint of Richmond's future looks like, what we need that all of these other cities that we compete with is a children's hospital. And we have 3 healthcare systems right now. 90% of their patients are adults. We talked a little bit about how healthcare is going to be the anchor of the future. And these healthcare systems are going to be concentrating on their adult patients, and the kids are going to get left out. There's been a lot of discussion about building a children's hospital. We have a philanthropist who's willing to donate upwards and over $150 million. So we have private investment. We have a need. I saw an article on one of the TV stations today where a child just spent 7 months at UVA. He's waiting for a heart transplant. We need to be treating these children in Richmond. We need to cooperate. The local governments are willing to collaborate. We need to encourage the business leaders to collaborate. We need to encourage the healthcare systems. And we need to talk to the governor because this town needs a children's hospital.
Okay. Any reaction? Okay. We got time for 2 more questions. They're approaching 8 o'clock. I feel that we could go on and on and on, and that's a good sign because this is probably the first of many conversations. So I'm going to go over here. You guys want to flip a coin? Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening. I'm John Accordino, VCU, Center for Urban and Regional Analysis.
Come over here so everybody can see you. Just
oh, okay, sure. I'm not sure there's that much to look at, but okay. I think the whole Richmond Hoosier project, and certainly the studies we've heard tonight, really ought to be taken seriously as a blueprint for our region. One thing that we haven't talked about, and I thought I would add on, both John and Bob talked about the new economic development. It's no longer about recruiting big branch plants to come to the city. It's about growing our workforce, growing our talent base as a way of adding value. But one of the things that we haven't talked about is the tremendously rapidly growing global economy, the middle class out there that are a tremendous opportunity for Richmond for the companies that we have here now. Really, the middle class in many, many countries is growing. They are an untapped opportunity to a large extent for our businesses that could do a lot more exporting. Now, there are people working on this. We're working with Greater Richmond Partnership, Virginia Gateway, and others to help businesses do that. But I think it's also really important for the region to get behind these kinds of efforts. A lot of the things we've talked about tonight, improved transit system, much better workforce training, all of this also feeds into a robust and healthy export initiative for our community. And beyond that, we need to be thinking about embracing the global economy. If we do that, I think we will find that we grow better, that we solve a lot of our problems, including embracing immigration and thinking about ourselves as the role we can play in the global economy. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Final question in the corner over there. Go ahead, Paige.
Good evening. My name is Michael Parsons, and I think in a lot of ways I'm one of the kind of people that Richmond wants to attract. I moved here 2 years ago with my girlfriend, and we both loved Richmond. We got married here this past year. We're looking for our first house here. I made my best friend move from Boston here about 6 months ago, so I'm bringing people with me. And we hope to stick around. And I get to work every day in the east end of Richmond. And if there is one thing that might eventually drive us away, it is always having a permanent underclass, or an east end and a west end, a rich end and a poor end, a black end and a white end. I don't want my kids to be raised in a place where there's a black section of town or a poor section of town and a white section of town and a rich section of town. So if you guys have any suggestions that are practical about ways that could mix things up, raise people up from poverty, desegregate our schools, our public housing, our jails, that would be appreciated, and we might stay for the rest of our lives until we become the same age as the boomers or the greatest generation over there, or hopefully beyond. Thank you.
Well, Gary, that's a good tee-up. Thank you very much for that. And we're at the 8 o'clock mark, and we've gone 2 hours in this conversation. Well, let's go full circle back to the presenters. That's a good way of teeing up because a lot of what you said were in the takeaways and in the shifts. You heard this tonight where you guys made the presentation representing demographic trends, social trends, and also 5 years of study. You heard the informed panel conversation, give you a first reaction. You got a slice of how Richmond will react to it, including items that are not on your all's radar screen, if I could use that cliche. Let's wrap up. Where do we go next? And what did you hear that either gave you confidence you're on the right mark, or are there other unfinished parts of the work still to be completed in the years ahead? Bob?
John? Sure. You go first and I'll go next.
All right. Well, we got to share sort of the tip of the iceberg tonight. We got to share just a little bit tonight from all the work of 4 or 5 years led by Dr. Trani. And there are 12 different studies on the website that have been done by hundreds of people. So a lot of energy went into this. And I think what I heard tonight gives me great hope because I am a Richmond native, and I've grown up and always heard the glass is half full here, but I'm hearing the glass is, half empty. It's the glass is half full, that we really have so much going for us. And yes, we don't have the pain, but we have the reality to know that we really have it made here. And so we've really got to leverage that and move forward. So I really appreciate all the comments and all the encouragement from many of you tonight.
Yeah. First, let me just thank everybody for coming out. It's just remarkable attendance here and interest. Secondly, I wanted to say that one of the things we wanted to do is that we didn't want to have a final report until we had a public session, a public forum. I think that's a very important part of what we were about. And I think we heard some things tonight that we want to make sure we get into a final report before we publish it. Because I think we heard a lot of confirmation of what we did, and then we also heard some things that should be addressed in a little more depth. So it was very, very helpful for us to have the public commentary. Finally, I would say that this whole issue of translating all the energy that we have among citizens and people who are concerned into that political arena is a very important part of how we go forward, because at the end of the day, we need all kinds of people who are active and engaged in the community. But we need to translate that, as Ken said, into the appropriate political will across the region to take the steps that can really move us forward. So again, we just want to thank everybody for the extraordinarily passionate and informed comments that we got this evening.
And on that, thank you. This concludes the 61st Public Square, Richmond's Future, What Next? Thanks so much for coming out.
Well done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ted, thank you. This was great. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Doug.